Thank you all for making time to go through this immersive learning experience with us. You are going to hear from some incredible voices in the Bay Area who are leading public advocacy efforts on behalf of community well-being. And Oakland is a precious place, one that needs all the help that it can get. So I want to go over just a couple of housekeeping items before we jump in. First, please keep your microphones on mute. We're going to encourage you to put your questions in the chat. And we are going to ask that in between our different presenters, we will answer a couple questions and then we will continue to move, and hopefully we will have time for additional questions at the end. Is everybody good with that? Okay, thumbs up. That sounds wonderful. All right, well with that, again, my name is Regina Jackson. Camille, if you can go ahead and put up my first slide, I'd appreciate it. I am representing the East Oakland Youth Development Center. It is a national model for youth development. And I have been in leadership since 1994. And if we're counting, in a couple of weeks, that'll be 27 years. The program that I lead was actually started by the Clorox Company. The former CEO of the Clorox Company's name is Robert Shetterly, and he had this idea about a place where kids could grow and thrive in a particularly challenged area. And challenging it is. Back in 1978, when doors first opened, 99% of the community was African American. You still have liquor stores on about every second corner and churches on every third. We are literally located in the midst of the killer corridor. That means the highest rate of homicide. I'd like to ask whoever has their mic on to turn it off, please. The noise is coming in. Thank you. The highest rate of homicide. We are surrounded by food deserts. You know the drill. So the point is that the programming was exceedingly important to provide to all of the people in the community. Our programs have continued to be free, and the buckets of program services that we provide are in arts, wellness, careers, and an entire continuum of education, from K to the high school equivalency person, pathway to college, and on. I am particularly excited that, if you want to advance that screen for me, please. I'm particularly excited to say that EOIDC's mission develops the social and leadership capacities of young people, because what we want them to do is go into higher education, have more options for employment, as well as leadership opportunities. And what we've seen over the last 42 years is that, in fact, is what's happening. I celebrate the fact that 80% of my professional staff are alumni who came up through the organization. And we have doctors and lawyers and PhDs and dance teachers and educational teachers and firefighters and you name it, police officers. They do represent the spectrum. And part of that is because of the character-based leadership platform that we teach and the youth-led initiatives that we offer. For example, during our summer, for the last 24 years, our programming has been youth-led. That means you could have a 16-year-old designing curriculum and teaching classes, or an 18-year-old managing the entire thing, a $300,000 budget with weekly field trips and the like. The whole point of EOIDC is to put young people in positions of power, in positions to succeed, so that they know, in fact, what is expected of them when they are in a professional environment. We may not be unique in focusing on our young people as subject matter experts of their own experience, but I know there aren't a lot out there that value young people's voice and presence the ways in which we do as a part of our culture. Our secret sauce is to provide social and emotional support. I also mentioned the character-based leadership, which is really critical, particularly for young people and disenfranchised communities, because that one quick decision can change the trajectory of their lives. So what I want to do now is shift our focus a little bit and talk about what it is to be in a community like this. It can be a wondrous experience, but all too often, because of the trauma that surrounds the neighborhoods, our young people, our families, they are victims of post-traumatic stress disorder. We can liken it to the kind of extremeness that soldiers in war fight. You know, they have the ambulances, just all these different traumatic noises that are happening all the time. The problem is that soldiers can leave war. Our families cannot leave where they live. And so one of the things that weighs on us is really what I consider now a dual pandemic. It's COVID and systemic racism. And that systemic racism is seen most clearly in policing. There's a slide up right now. We know across the country, you know, it wasn't new because of George Floyd. It wasn't new because of Breonna Taylor or any of the numbers of people that we can list. Unfortunately, racial profiling focuses on and impacts African Americans more than any other race. And police officers in their engagement are oftentimes escalating just from the ground up. The mental health and homeless issues that are visited upon African American populations further traumatizes their experience. We know that the disproportionate number of fatalities are from gunshots, but we do have a variety of ways in which our families, our young people are inappropriately impacted. And as the head tag says, Blacks are only 7% of the Bay Area, but they're 27% of those killed by police. 2.5 years ago, there was a race and equity report card done for the city of Oakland, and it got an F for fail. And one of the numbers that was most impressive to me or disappointing was that in policing, racial profiling got a number 1 out of 100. And that speaks to the disproportionate number of people who are stopped without cause, without intelligence-led information. In the midst of a pandemic, all of this becomes very, very acute. But prior to the pandemic, as a community leader, I thought the ways in which we care for and love our families and our children is safe inside our bubble, inside our building. But we can't keep them safe once they leave. And that continues to give me chills. It is a failing of being able to protect those that we invest so much in. And it's one of those things that as a community leader, you know, we stretch ourselves thin to try and do and be everything we can to support the success of those we serve. So much so that around 2014, I began thinking about these police commissions that are across the country and asking about them. And in Oakland, they were like, no, we probably won't do anything like that. And then in 2016, on the heels of an exceptional scandal, Measure LL was put on the ballot, and Measure LL created the police commission. I sought out the mayor and asked her to appoint me, and she did so. If you will advance to the next slide. The police commission, it's an interesting entity because while it was overwhelmingly voted forth by 83% of the citizens, what I wasn't ready for was that the city did not want us. There was so much negative talk about this oversight body. Now, the Oakland Police Commission is designed to oversee OPD policies and protocols and customs in an effort to meet national standards of constitutional policing. One of the biggest challenges that we faced from the gate was that Oakland has been under a negotiated settlement agreement for 17 years based upon the scandals inside the Oakland Police Department, the poor way in which they track data, and certainly the way they execute their work. Our commission was put in place to ensure that accountability was job one 24/7. And that resistance you see across the country. People do not want to be held accountable in the high level ways that commissions will do. There are those that suggest that we as citizens, volunteers with no police background might not know what we're doing, might not be able to see it from their perspective. But I submit that as a community leader, I have watched way too many police cars come into our area. I have seen shakedowns, and the other professionals on the commission dais with me also have their own engagements with police. One of the things that I referenced was that over the last 10 years or so, none of my kids wanted to be police officers. They wanted to be firefighters, teachers, everything except police. And part of that is because of the ways that they are engaged. One of the things that I thought would be really critical was to have an opportunity to impact those policies, those trainings, based upon my own experience in training young people. And I figured that my voice might not be the ultimate voice, might not be the perfect voice, but that I could affect change. And that's the reason that I signed up. Now, I'll be honest with you, I did not realize that it was as political as it was. I thought I was going to go in there and do hard work and research and provide suggestions. But the systems that were in place, as I mentioned, did not want us. Almost immediately, the city attorney drafted a paper that said that we should not be in charge of having an inspector general, that we should not be able to select our own independent counsel. And I was shell-shocked. You know, these were provided for in the measure that had been approved overwhelmingly. And there were more and more efforts that sought to push back on our accountability. But as many of the community leaders on this call know, we know how to fight. We get scrappy and we climb these ladders in order to ensure that we can do what needs to be done. Some paperwork or something. So what I wanted to share was, although we didn't have much staff, we didn't have administrative setup, we didn't even have emails at the beginning, we forged on. And the first policy that we came up with was a parole and probation policy. One of the things we recognized, as I mentioned about the stops and even the negotiated settlement agreement, is that people on parole and probation are more easily victimized than any other population in the Bay Area. Our policy called for no more warrantless searches. You couldn't just search somebody and stop their day and violate them just because they were on parole or probation. In addition, we had something fairly simple, which is really around humanizing the effort of engagement. When police roll up, almost the first question out of their mouth is, are you on parole or probation? Well, I can tell you by an extended experience with my own son, who was in college at the time, in a car with his 4 other friends who were also in college, and nobody had had any negative engagements with the police, that when they were pulled over because they were racially profiled and they were asked that question, they were insulted. And when you get young Black males that are insulted, usually it is much easier to escalate that scenario so that then the police have a reason to take you to jail. Fortunately for them, not only had their families had the talk with them, and EOYDC had the talk with them, but they also knew that they needed to be as compliant as possible in order to get out of that process. What I'm here to say is that the parole and probation policy took that negative engagement, that interaction off the cuff out. They have to acknowledge someone's presence. They need to ask how they're doing, you know, in the midst of all of the angst of being pulled over. They should say why they were pulled over. It should be intelligence-led stops, and that data is being collected today. The policy, as we proposed it, was something that the Oakland Police Department disagreed with. So they went with their own version to City Council for approval of the policy. And I'm here to tell you that in that particular instance, the City Council unanimously supported the Commission's version. That was a big win for us. As we moved forward, if you can scroll to the highlights, we have a use of force policy that we will likely be voting on tomorrow. We have quite a few actions that we have taken. Unfortunately, we had to fire the ED of the Community Police Review Agency, which is the agency that runs in tandem with IA, or the investigative unit of OPD. Most people don't even know that it exists, but it is for the people. They run complementary investigations to check and double check that the OPD's investigations are actually on par. And when they disagree around discipline or findings, then those issues are elevated to a discipline committee of the commission. We actually held one last year around the homicide of a homeless white man by the name of Joshua Pollock. We determined that the officer should be terminated, and we suspended the supervisor. There are many rounds of, of fighting back and forth around mediation and all that to determine whether or not a police officer can really be fully and finally terminated. And there is one mediation left. But when everyone was shocked that we did this, oh my God, these volunteers, this civilian commission doesn't know what they're doing. We were affirmed by the Skelly hearing officer. We were affirmed by the judge. And most recently, we've been affirmed by the federal monitor who manages the negotiated settlement agreement. It's really interesting that when we do something that we have the power to do, then people are in shock. And then give it about 8 or 9 months, And then many people come to the conclusion that it was actually the right thing to do. Right now, we have a measure that's going to be on the ballot in November. And part of it is a restatement of Measure LL, because as I mentioned to you, the city attorney suggested that it was not appropriate for us to supervise the inspector general or for us to get independent legal counsel. This measure reclarifies the powers that were originally granted to us. We expect it actually to pass. We even have the support of, get this, the OPOA, the Oakland Police Union. And we have been on opposite ends of the argument from day one. In addition to hearings, measures, we have had the opportunity to do some out-of-the-box thinking. We first got presented to around a cahoots model from Oregon, which was 911 responses are not met by police officers. They are met by other professionals, whether they're social workers, therapists, counselors, whatever it is. We in Oakland are now putting this macro program into place by Oaklandizing it. Clearly the issues that go on in Oregon are very different from Oakland, but it's a great way to, one, provide jobs to people who are most or best able to respond. We are continuing to look at those kinds of things as it relates to any kind of defund police measures. And it's really a simple kind of assertion. Does towing need an armed officer? Do calls for mental health challenges need an armed officer's response? We feel like there is a traumatization that already happens when an officer shows up, and officers may not be best, based upon experience, to respond to mental health crises or to other lower level kinds of challenges. But we have been in this space of, you get a hangnail, you call 911. That's so not the appropriate way to move forward. And it's not a good way to use our officers either. In kind of wrapping this up, the Oakland Police Commission is considered one of the strongest commissions in the country. And that determination happens to be most because of our firepower. We can terminate officers, we can terminate the chief of police. And we did so late February earlier this year. We are currently in the midst of a police chief search, and we will provide names to the mayor, and she will make the selection based upon our process. The future of the Oakland Police Commission, I think, is quite bright, and part of it has to do with the fact that culture's got to change. We are now seeing that even the DA is charging officers for homicides. She never used to do that. The Oscar Grant case was just reopened by her. I think people are understanding that it's a new day and that things have been done inappropriately for decades. And moving forward, we're going to have more eyes and more ears on the pulse of how the most disenfranchised are dealt with. I remember a time where the Black Panthers were very involved. Obviously, they started in Oakland. They were an incredible community resource for the free breakfast lunch programs, the community schools, and so on. And I remember the first efforts to have Panthers run for elected office. It didn't work at that time, but it's a very interesting concept to have people who are on the ground serving community, moving into elected positions, commission positions. We have one of the most highly decorated Congress people who started out as a social worker, and I'm proud that she's my Congresswoman. This is Congresswoman Barbara Lee. What I ultimately want to share with you is that I didn't get into the commission to deal with politics. I got onto the commission to make change. And as community leaders, we are stretched. We are stretched to the nines. But in moments like this, oftentimes it behooves us to continue to use our social capital, our knowledge, to make change in areas where laws, policies, and enforcement can take place. I don't hesitate or I don't question my move to become one of the first on the Oakland Police Commission. I have learned a lot, and I feel like we've been able to begin that process of change. And I would only have done that because of my concern for the families that I have been investing in and working with for the last 27 years. So that's my story, and I'm sticking with it. Hopefully I haven't bored you. And if there are any questions in the queue, I'd like to take one or two before we move on to our next speaker, CJ Johnson of the collective. Camille,
there's no questions right now. If anybody has a question for Regina, please feel free to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask away.
And certainly any of the speakers that you can ask questions too if there's something on fire for you.
All right, we can keep moving right along.
All righty. Okay, so as I mentioned to you all before we started this, you're in for a treat. We have a series of incredible professionals, experts in their field, and I'm delighted to be able to bring to you next Carolyn Johnson of the Black Cultural Zone Collective. So I'm going to throw it over to you, Carolyn, and have at it. And please,
thank you.
Send those chats in.
Yeah, thank you so much, Regina, for inviting me and the Black Cultural Zone to present here today. I just want to do a little reach back to what you were talking about. My family is from 84th, a couple blocks from EOYDC, and I definitely was there in high school as much as possible. And the influence and the work that you do really does make a difference. Especially for Black girls as well. At that time, there was just the boys clubs, which meant that I couldn't go. And so when EOYDC opened, it was the first place where, believe it or not, boys and girls mixed after school. So thank you for the work that you do. And again, my name is CJ. I am born and raised in East Oakland. I'm currently blessed to have the opportunity to be the Chief Executive Officer of the Black Cultural Zone Community Development Corporation. But I want to give you a quick history of the Black Cultural Zone, which was conceived in 2014 to really address the disparate impact that decades of disinvestment and racism in Oakland and the most recent displacement of Black people and businesses from legacy communities here in Oakland. You heard Regina mention earlier that at the time when they opened, 99% of the folks who were at EOYDC were Black people. Now those numbers are different. Our numbers in Oakland have declined from being a majority Black city to not majority Black city, but it also impacts our businesses. People have left for many reasons, but for many people, they've left because they can't afford to live here. This place is unwelcoming. And so this is what it looks like. So the Black Cultural Zone came to really say, we want to hold place for Black people and Black business in Oakland, but using a community development framework. But community development frameworks for all the great work that CDCs do have not boded well for Black people. Sometimes people get upset when I say that, but I say, look at the facts. The displacement of Black folks in Oakland, the fact that 70% or more of the homeless folks living a few blocks from where they grew up are Black people, the decimation of Black business. There used to be 1,000 Black businesses along the entire East 14th Street corridor. There is literally, you can count them on two hands. So something's not working. And we believe that what's not working is really not actually centering in community development work, Black arts and Black culture unapologetically. And so the East Oakland Black Cultural Zone Collaborative was formed to really, by Eastside Arts Alliance and several nonprofit organizations located in East Oakland, to really designate an area that had been a legacy Black community, 50 blocks from High Street. You won't know that if you're not from here, to San Leandro, but it's about half of the city that was majority Black and still currently houses the majority of Black people who do live in Oakland. So it's 50 square blocks. Our goal was really to hold place for our community of Black residents and leaders and organizations to keep culture and place for Black folks in East Oakland. We currently have 20 partners, Black-led organizations, which I am going to go through the list because it's really instructive that the approach to really holding place for Black people and advocating for Black issues is not the strongman. It's not the individual approach. It's not what's typical in this particular country, but it goes back to our indigenous practices of collaboration, cohesion, cooperation, and councils. It's a change of consciousness that we cannot do this alone. We must work together. So Elena Museum is one of our partners, Allen Temple, Health and Social Services, Bay Area Black Market, the Black Cultural Zone, CDC, which I will talk about later, Blink Lab Architecture, East Bay Permanent Real Estate Collective, East Oakland Building Healthy Communities, East Oakland Collective, East Oakland Grocery Cooperative, now called the DEEP, East Oakland Youth Development Center, Eastside Arts Alliance, Ground and Soul, Neighborhood Housing Services of the East Bay, Oakland Public Conservatory of Music, Original Black Print, RBA Creative, Roots Health Clinic, Spirit Works, Steps and Ladders, Support Oakland Artists. We're also supported by our allies, organizations and businesses that support our cause, who believe that we want a city that has Black people here, that are not just consumers, but owners of property and assets and are engaged and have power. The ultimate goal is to build Black power, because powerlessness looks like 70% of us are making up the homeless ranks. It looks like the pandemic impacting us disproportionately. It looks like having a city that has an F rating. It looks like it doesn't work for us. So the ultimate goal is really to build power for Black people. And it starts by creating that collaboration. We have supporters and friends, people that invest in us, people like the San Francisco Foundation, people that support us like our council members, Lauren Taylor on the line as well. But the purpose of the East Oakland Black Cultural Zone Collaborative was to innovate and to incubate and inform and elevate community-driven projects that allow our people and culture to thrive. We are not thriving. We are barely surviving. And that is not something that we can live with. We have core values, but our core value really is to distinguish ourselves from how community development has been done by centering arts and culture, preserving our history and innovating that. Our people, to be unapologetically and deliberately Black, our culture, preserve and uplift our customs, our arts, our institutions, our manifestations of who we are, to really promote love and unity. We cannot do this being disunified. We must do this with love and care. And to be creative, it's gonna take creative approaches to really address the problem, not just from the last 10 years, 20 years, but since we were brought to these shores as enslaved people. We were brought in a powerless position, and it's been a battle ever since. But we have nowhere else to go. We have nothing else to do but to turn around, to face forward, and to fight this fight creatively. We have core strategies as well. In addition to the core value of centering Black arts and Black culture, we have to hold place. We have to hold and elevate our presence here. We have strategies around anti-displacement, about activating public lands, about acquiring assets, because again, if we are just consumers and not owners, the money flows out and it does not flow in. Our next strategy is really around a strong economy. At the end of the day, you can't be an owner. You can't have an ownership class if we don't have a robust and cooperative production and distribution system that supports our collective sufficiency. We have to build wealth. We have to build workforce development programs. We have to have activities and advocacy so that we can generate income and that we have an economy that is strong. What does a strong economy look like? It's one where the majority of the dollars remain in our community for as long as possible, and we bring in more economy than we bring out. I've heard many folks say, well, the Black dollar stays in for 6 hours or 6 minutes or 6 days, various things, and Black people should do more. But I want to remind everyone of things like Tulsa and the Black Wall Street, At that time, the Black dollar stayed in the Black community for a year or more, and it was strategically and savagely destroyed. We have more national Black organizations than any other ethnic group. We have fits and starts of building our economy, and by hook or by crook, they've been destroyed. I always say that, you know, the Tulsa bombing was a dramatic thing. It basically decimated an amazing business district, residents, strong economy with a quick blow. But what has been happening since the 40s has been slow. In Oakland, you know, you go from a 99% Black community. What happened? Right? It was slow. We had the crack epidemic. We had, you know, predatory lending. We had foreclosures. We had pandemics. And the results are still the same. I walk down my streets, still, my family lives on 84th. I see trash. I see empty vacant buildings. I see no businesses. I see people walking around as if they're ghosts. So the impact of what has happened, even with the strong community development group of businesses and organizations, has the same feel and look as if we've been bombed. So we have to focus on building a strong economy and building quality of life. It is important that we have an environment where we can thrive mentally and spiritually and emotionally and physically. What we're going through now with the pandemic is heavy on our hearts and on our minds. People are losing. Those numbers are not fake news. Those are people who lost their families. What does it look like to have to go to work, knowing that you've got someone who's struggling? Mental health, physical health, quality of life, clean streets, safe streets. Those are things that are not big requests, but those are the things that the East Oakland Black Culture Zone Collaborative are demanding and working together collaboratively for our community. But most importantly, we want our freedom. We believe that when Black people are free, all are free. If we can make this work for us, it will work for everyone. And it's important that we put forward that all of this work is around freedom, and freedom is based on building Black power. And so we always invite people to explore a couple of questions with us. What does it mean to love and embrace Black people and culture? And we want people to not just love who we are and our expressions, but to actually love us and to show it in action. I want to just talk a little bit about the organization that I now represent, which is a proud partner of the East Oakland Black Culture Zone Collaborative. This collaborative got together in 2019 and decided that it needed an entity to actually move the community development, the commercial development, the economic development work as we center Black arts and culture, and we formed the Black Cultural Zone Community Development Corporation. And I want to share the vision and mission of the organization. Our vision is for a robust and vibrant renaissance in legacy Black communities, vibrant, thriving Black arts, cultural and commercial areas in a thriving economy, an ecosystem anchored by Black arts and culture and commerce and collective power that assures our inalienable right, human right, to love and health and wellness and belonging and power and safety and self-determination. The mission of the Black Culture Zone CDC is to unapologetically center Black arts and culture and economics as we collectively design, resource, transform, and build collective power for our communities. But we have to start at the beginning. We are focused on building Black cultural hubs within the Black Cultural Zone. These catalyst hubs are not just to acquire space, because we must own cooperatively and manage collectively, but we have to have places that we own that we can anchor our neighborhoods with, where you can go and get retail, Black restaurants, Black food, Black support. And those are the anchor of the strategy, the economic strategy, one, to hold place for Black people and Black business, and a place where you can actually bring in more into our economy than we put out. If we don't have places that we can buy from our own and others can buy from us, then again, our dollars will continue to go out of our communities. So those hubs are important. But we also understand with community development that when you do buy an asset, like real estate, and you develop it, it becomes really cool and folks start coming, you can be the lead gentrifier in your own community. So it's also important that we not just acquire and develop those hubs, but as we do that, that we acquire property around those hubs for the growth that we will create. We find a lot of times that Black culture and Black people are utilized by developers and owner classes to make it really cool, and then their lease is up. they lose their lease. And so we're looking to make sure that we can ground and hold space for Black people around there that can invest in those hubs that are nearby. Those businesses that are in those hubs have an ownership stake, as well as outside investors. And so we have a strategy around that. But as we develop those hubs, we want partners like those that are in the collaborative to look at the housing that will, again, the work that we do will increase the value. How do we hold place and space for affordable housing in the neighborhood, which is why the collaborative has to be broad. We look to have a very thriving Black art scene. Black culture is the mojo all over the world. This country is known for who Black people are. Everyone monetizes that but us. How do we make sure that we support our Black artists, our Black muralists, our Black performers to actually get the benefit of the work that they do that's based on our culture? So there are lots of things that we want to do, but I want to make sure that we understand that one model for our CDC is that not one group will own all of these things. We've seen that model before. Oakland has had a community development corporation many years ago that went out of business. It was a sad tale. Lots of properties were lost. And we understand that, again, going back to how African practices are, we are a village. And when we own property, we should own it collaboratively and collectively. So if someone fails, it's hard for someone, there's someone there to pick up, and we won't lose that. There have been so many fits and starts in this country, from Reconstruction of us building and losing, whether it's taken by force, like Tulsa, or we lose it with the crack epidemic or the foreclosures. And so how do we make sure that we don't lose those gains? What we're doing now is really focused on sort of building out those cultural hubs along commercial corridors. We are currently licensing a property that's owned by the city. We've named that place Liberation Park. It's at the corner of 73rd and Foothill. Yeah. You wouldn't know it if you're not from here, but it's the heart of East Oakland. And so, you know, one of the things that we have to do is all of our government entities that owns land, whether it be the school district, the city, the county, the state, that's the people's property. And we need to hold our government accountable. What are you doing with that property? How can we put that in service of this mission of holding place for Black people and Black business? And so we are going after that site. We have a license agreement. That property has been listed as surplus property. They are about to put the notice of availability out there, and we are going to put together a team that will acquire that property for the people. But it's important to brand it, to get people to understand that it is possible. Black community has everything that it needs. We have to organize ourselves. We have to collaborate and focus in the same direction and work with each other to support each other's projects. So pop-up villages, commercial space, community space, supporting all of our partners. The partners that I listed, out of that list of 20 partners, they all, between them, have about 14 different projects that are under their belt that they're looking to do and to develop. So when folks say, well, no one's doing anything, to the extent that we can work together, elevate our projects, go after funding together, go after support together, have our ideas, share and work with each other, that is the only way that we win. That's one of the values of the collaborative, is that it isn't a collaborative approach. We cannot do this alone. So in addition to some of our physical hubs, we know that there have been many Black folks who are displaced. They're in Atlanta, they're in Antioch, they're in Brooklyn, they're all over the place. And so a virtual cultural hub is important as well, because we want to reconnect those whose heart is still in Oakland, who left for no reason of their own, but that they were forced to leave, to reconnect with the community. But one of the big goals is that in order to rebuild our community, we're going to have a return of some of these folks. So how do we engage them? We'll engage them with a virtual cultural hub. But in addition to the hubs, we know that there are ancillary facilities that are needed to support those hubs. If we have an outdoor hub, for example, where we show movies, and we had our first movie night a couple of weeks ago, which was a lot of fun, outdoor movies, or we have restaurants, we need commissary spaces, we need logistical spaces, we need storage spaces. And so looking at the landscape of the entire 50 by 50 sort of radius of the Black Cultural Zone hub, we believe our goal is that Black-led organizations, Black developers, Black owners collectively are shooting for 25% of those assets to be held in Black hands. That is the only way, in our opinion, to truly make a difference. Are these numbers astronomical? Absolutely, but what has happened to our people, what has happened to us here, is astronomical. And the only way to really turn the tide is to go big, go hard, and really go after a massive amount. And so we can't peep along. We can't get a little building here when we can, but we've seen what that's done over the last 40 years of community development. It's led to absolute major displacement of Black people and Black business in Oakland. So unless we have a radically different approach, an aggressive approach, an approach that dreams big and dreams in an astounding way, we will again eke out small wins for a few of our organizations, and that has not worked for our community. We focus also on just the Black economy development. So there are a lot of Black-led organizations who provide business and technical assistance. How are we organizing those resources to actually support existing Black businesses? We've supported a group called the Black Economy Network, about 43 organizations, to really focus and connect them with Black businesses, because it's important to talk with folks who can understand your true situation. But in addition, the pandemic in and of itself showed how the lack of access to capital is something that we should focus on. If you don't have money, how do you eat? And it's that basic. How do you survive? So one of the projects that we're working on is called the Kaori Currency Collective. It is an alternative currency for East Oakland. One that, for example, if I can mow Mrs. Johnson's lawn, maybe on Sunday I can go and exchange that at the Acoma market for food. So how do we create our own economy that can survive regardless of whether or not the pandemic hit, you're out of work? How does mutual aid, how does digital currency, how does trade, time banking and exchange work? And so we are actively looking to figure out how can we elevate an alternative currency for our community, because when you have unemployment rates that tend to always be twice as high as every other community, we're going to have a lack of access to capital. I want to just share one more thing in terms of one of the projects that we're working on. When I go back to Liberation Park, we do have an Acoma outdoor market where we highlight Black and brown farmers, highlight Black and brown retailers, vendors, and service providers on Sundays from 9 to 3 in Oakland. But that's an example of one small step towards a much broader vision to allow our businesses to have places to vend, to allow our community and other communities to be able to vend with Black and brown businesses to build that economy, which also is a part of the strategy to take permanent control over that site. And we do that collectively and collaboratively. I don't want to spend too much time, but I want to say at the end of the day, we have to move our consciousness from working alone and in silos to working collaboratively. That is the way to win. The second thing is we have to move our consciousness from being consumers to owners, because in this country, that is what helps to build power. And finally, we all have to look at the work that we can do individually in our organizations to unapologetically build Black power. If I have to explain to you why elevating Black folks, given what we've been through in this country and are still dealing with, then we don't have a conversation. But if you can agree with that and support that mission, it's important to have a city that has a Black presence and a country or Black people who have the right to a quality life. That is what we're seeking, and that's what we're looking for. So thank you.
Awesome, CJ. Thank you so much. We did get one question from Irene Yen, and I know that you talked a bit about bartering, but her specific question is community banking a piece of the plan?
Community banking is important. We would like to see every single check cashing place gone in East Oakland. I was talking with, I forget who I was talking to this morning, and we hired some young folks there from the 100 Black Men. And I found out yesterday that when they cash their checks, they're going to a check cashing place at 12% rates. And so, you know, getting our young people bank accounts and all those things are going to be important, but that is important, but it has to be the kinds of organizations that are not extractive and not exploitive as well. So yes, that's a part of our strategy.
Great, thank you.
Mama CJ, I have a question too.
Yes.
Great, thank you for the presentation. My question was going to be, can you just say a little bit more about some of the traditional African centered values that went into the thinking and the architecture of the Black Cultural Zone? I mean, I know the Sankofa bird, the Adinkra symbol and the logo, and
Yeah.
You just made so many great points about how some of the ancient and contemporary cultural pieces of Black folks have played a role in you all's approach. And I was wondering if you could say a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, I think at the base level, in terms of preserving and highlighting Black culture, was really having conversations with a lot of the folks who've been in the Black arts and culture and power movements in Oakland to begin with. What worked well? What didn't work? What happened? How can we do better? I think that's definitely a part of our understanding. Reaching back and really connecting to our West African cultures, symbols, ideology, and just bringing that to the fore. So many Black people are afraid to acknowledge their Africanness and that we are from Africa. There's shame with that, there's embarrassment with that, and we're elevating that to the top and explaining what those things are and what they mean. When you center Black arts and culture, everything we do, the Akoma market, right? That's an Ndinkra symbol. It means the heart, it means the center. And people begin to ask that question, like, where'd that come from? And they begin to see it with pride. If you were to see, and I should have had pictures of Liberation Park, you see we have murals all over the place, inside and out, with different messages and statements and so on and so forth. Every time we open the Akoma market or do something with Liberation Park, we make sure it's a sacred space. We go around and smoke out the space and air out the space. And we meet with each other and talk about what we want for that day. And we let people know when you walk in, we have something called the Codes of Righteousness, which talks about what we expect people to do. And it's based on principles of how we love and support each other. So in everything that we do, we are bringing our arts and culture work group in to make sure that we really elevate Black presence, Black arts, and Black culture, however that best shows up in everything that we do, because we are unapologetically Black proud people.
Thanks, CJ. We have one more question before we go to our next speaker, and that's from Philip Graham. How can social capital, or the value of networks and connection approaches, be leveraged to promote, support, and sustain this important work?
Right. Thank you so much for that. And I think, again, in terms of the financing, the world, capitalism and the financing world, we need very patient capital for two reasons. One is to keep the cost of capital low, which makes it more affordable. And so to the extent that we can have low cost patient capital, I think about the opportunity zone funds. I mean, finding funders who would hold off and wait till that 10th year to get their return would give us much more breathing room. I think that, so that's definitely a part of it. The patient capital, the low interest capital, and also looking for the market returns. There are a lot of opportunity zone investors I've talked to, and they're 35%, that doesn't work. So how do we mix those returns with other returns to make sure that we have a much more balanced sort of capital structure to make it affordable? You have to have capital also that says, look, I want to build this hub, but I want to buy 3, 4, or 5 other buildings around it because down the road, they will have value. But people want to make money right now. They want a business plan that shows in year 2, you're breaking even. And that's just not a model that can actually work. We need patient capital that understands the strategy and the plan, that it is a very long-term play, and that ultimately the ownership of this one should be in the hands of the people who live nearby, who occupy that space, and that's a different model.
Thank you, CJ. You may have questions later for her. Obviously, she's incredible. And that diatribe, I want your script. And so now we're going to move to the next guest speaker. This guy, I mean, I hope he tells you just a little bit about his life, but I need for you all to know that in his other life as a city administrator, he saved mine. We were in the midst of a renovation and expansion, and he took the time to see that the city attorney's office was trying to take away our opportunity to buy our building back in the lease, something I might never have seen. And not only did he see it, but he fixed it and made it happen for us. In his current position as president of the San Francisco Foundation, he is turning things on. And I have the opportunity. Your microphone on mute. I'm hearing interference. Okay. He's turning everything on its head. As the president of the San Francisco Foundation, I am so proud to present one of our funders, one of my biggest supporters, Fred Blackwell.
Thank you, Regina. It's really a pleasure to be with everybody. You can hold that slide until later on down the line. I'll tell you when to bring it up. And Regina, I just want to say it's a pleasure to work with you. As CJ said, you know, EOYDC has been a beacon forever in East Oakland, and we know that that is due to decades of your really great leadership in that organization. So really appreciate you. And I love seeing some of the familiar faces in these squares. And CJ, I'm here for everything that you just talked about. I loved everything that you had to say. I will be kind of brief because, you know, there's a lot to cover, and I actually feel like as a funder, our role is kind of small in the world, and where people like these women are really making change. I do want to tell you a little bit about the San Francisco Foundation and tell you kind of how we are oriented to this work and some of the things that we're doing. But then I want to end with, I think, something that is very much in line with some of the things that CJ talked about, which is a new fund that we're involved in creating and launching that I think is really about several of the underlying values that CJ just talked about. As Regina said, you know, most of my time has been in the public sector. Regina, most of this gray hair on my chin came from my time in the city of Oakland. When I got there, it was all Black. But, you know, that was still time well spent. The San Francisco Foundation is an organization that's almost 75 years old now. We are a community foundation. And although we're called the San Francisco Foundation, we actually have a regional footprint in the Bay Area. So we in the East Bay serve Alameda and Contra Costa counties, and along the coast, we're Marin, San Francisco, and San Mateo counties. We have really two lines of business, the way that I would describe it. One is we are blessed to have a $800 million plus endowment, and what we do with that is discretionary grant making, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like for us a little bit later. But the other line of business that is really interesting and is something that I've had to learn a lot about since being at the foundation, I've been there for about 6 years now, is we act as a platform for other people's philanthropy in the Bay Area. So we house about probably $600 or $700 million in donor advised funds where folks do their philanthropy through us as an alternative to starting a family foundation or a corporate foundation. And we try our best to get those folks aligned with some of the things that we are focused in on. As I said, I've been there for about 6 years now, and for the last 5 years, we have been focused in on a North Star that is about creating a greater degree of racial equity and economic inclusion at a regional level of scale here in the Bay Area. And we selected that North Star because it was our observation that while there was a tremendous amount of economic growth, opportunity, wealth being generated in the Bay Area, access to it was limited. And access to it was limited based on where people were living, what their family's economic status might be, or something as simple as their race or ethnicity. And we were hearing from our conversations with community, our conversations with folks who are on the front lines of doing this work, that's not the Bay Area that we like to associate ourselves with. And as the community foundation working in the Bay Area, we felt a need to be responsive to that. And so after selecting that North Star, as Regina said, I kind of turned over all the tables at the San Francisco Foundation and completely reorganized our work around that North Star. And so we went from being organized around issue areas like community development and community health and arts and culture and education to organizing ourselves around what we thought were the pathways to equity. which revolve around the concepts of people, place, and power. And while those other issues that I mentioned don't go away, we think about them now in relationship to those three pathways to equity that I just mentioned. So I want to talk a little bit about each one of those and then kind of concentrate on one of them. The first one around people is really about the recognition that without economic mobility, the ability to gather an income that can support a family, the ability to generate wealth for your family and your community, you cannot achieve equity. And so that body of work is supporting organizations that are raising the floor and improving working conditions for low-wage families, supporting organizations that are working on workforce development and other kinds of economic mobility strategies. But it's also focused in on removing the barriers to economic opportunity. Your involvement in the criminal justice system should not be a barrier to opportunity. The fact that there's uneven access to high quality education should not be a barrier to opportunity. Your immigration status should not be a barrier to opportunity. All those things are things that we are also working on because we think that that is really connected to the work around people. If I could just explain briefly what our work around place is, I would say what CJ said. The work is really about preserving place, preserving culture for communities of color in the Bay Area that have long been anchors for the Bay Area. I mean, it is ridiculous that these communities can simultaneously be literally the heart and soul of the community that we call the Bay Area, but the people who have been the creators of that soul are hanging on by a thread to stay in place, to preserve their culture, to preserve their art, and to thrive in the places where they grew up for generations. And so that work is really the work that we think about when we think about place. Lastly, power revolves around this concept, that we can have all the greatest ideas that we want, having to do with people, having to do with place. But if there isn't an authentic constituency of people of color who are demanding change and engaged in political and civic life and connected to those good ideas, those ideas will not have the scale of impact that we need in order for change to occur, nor will they be sustainable at the level that we think that they should. And so we think that power is actually foundational to being able to make the other kind of changes that we are talking about, whether it's from a programmatic or policy point of view. And I want to stick with the power piece for a second and just explain to you a little bit of like our worldview around this stuff, particularly in this moment. I mean, what we are seeing around us is a reckoning around race, but it's also a reckoning around power. And when we look around us, whether we're looking at the direct health impacts associated with COVID, the indirect economic impacts associated with COVID that revolve around having the shelter in place and social distance. We look at the impact in the school system, all those things, in addition to everything that we are witnessing around the failings of the law enforcement system, which Regina, you talked about in great depth. Those represent profound systemic failures that are failing our communities generally. And if you look at who's disproportionately impacted by this stuff, failing the Black community specifically. And it is easy to pin that on a few bad apples or who was in the White House or one political party. But the reality is that these system failures are a failure of democracy and are the result of a system and an approach that is revolving around cultural exclusion that is weakening democracy. It's our point of view that the failing systems are a result of the weakening of democracy, that a strong and robust democracy is out of reach without racial justice. And racial justice is out of reach without the understanding and recognition that at the core of racial injustice is anti-Black racism. So that work for us is translated into, and you can show the slide now. And while the slide is coming up, I will just kind of tell you a little bit. Some of you all who know me know my mom is a wonderful woman named Angela Glover Blackwell. I talk about her all the time. And one of the things that I quote from her that sticks with me all the time is that she says, if you have identified a solution to a complex problem that only involves yourself, you either don't understand the problem or have the wrong solution. And so what I'm about to talk about now is a collaborative effort that we are engaged in with a group of other foundations in the state of California, led by a really wonderful, strong sister, Latifah Simon, at the Akhenaten Foundation. And what it is really, we're creating a Black Freedom Fund. And the Black Freedom Fund is a 5-year, $100 million initiative whose mission it is to build and sustain the power of Black-led organizations, coalitions, and networks in order to realize equity and justice for Black communities in California. We are about $40 million into that $100 million raise, and the whole purpose of it is to build and amplify, strengthen, and sustain Black power in the state of California. Here you can see a little bit of kind of what we hope to do and what some of the expected outcomes are. I'm not going to read every piece of this, but there are a few things that I do want to lift up. The idea here is that through this process, there will be designed a Black community agenda. There will be Black power exercised to win on that agenda, and that Black people will play key decision-making roles in determining and really advocating for policy and system changes that really impact their lives. Simply stated, that's really what it's about. We think that this is important for a couple of reasons. One is that one of the things that we were hearing from organizations that we work with here in California, in the Bay Area specifically, was that the national efforts that were focused in on supporting Black-led organizations were absolutely great. People really liked to see it, but that there really wasn't, the impact of that wasn't being felt in our own backyard, and that we really needed to focus in on California when it comes to Black power. The second thing is that, Regina, you mentioned our history and legacy around the Black Panther Party, but there's a kind of a unique experience around movement building and Black power building that exists in California specifically. That is, one, about explicitly Black power, but two, also explicitly about making the link between Black power and the power and liberation and freedom of everybody. And those are things that we think really need to be supported and lifted up, especially in this moment. We also think that there needs to be the infrastructure to support this work. We think that programs and services are actually important and prerequisite towards getting to the kind of change that we need, but at the same time insufficient to getting to where we need to go. And that explicitly focusing in on power building and movement building as distinct from, and in addition to, program and service delivery was an important thing to support, and an important thing to support on its own. So, I mean, that's really what I wanted to share with you. Like I said, it's the product of a lot of work, and there are three things that we want to accomplish in the first year. One is we want to identify and support probably up to 3 networks of Black power building organizations up and down the state. The other thing that we want to do is launch a process to make sure that we can include folks who aren't a part of those networks. And then the last thing we want to do is start up the agenda for change. Last thing I want to say is this. A lot of attention is being focused, rightfully so, on the presidential election in November, but there are very important things on the ballot for the state of California as it relates to advocacy and justice in the state of California. Prop 15 will be turning back and reforming Prop 13 and really looking at split roll and taking commercial property out of the protections associated with Prop 13. That will literally result in hundreds of $millions coming back to communities for the kinds of things that we all work on and for the communities that we care about. And Prop 16, which is a part of the reflection of the leadership of Eva Patterson, someone, if you don't know, you should know. I was enlightened a little bit earlier to a phrase that young people say nowadays, which is GTS, which stands for Google that shit. If you don't know who Eva Patterson is, Google that shit. She is wonderful. And her work is really about turning back and repealing Prop 209, which has been just an albatross for the communities of color in terms of being able to access public institutions, from contracting to UC admissions. And so I think it's really important for us to focus in on some very important statewide ballot initiatives at the top of that list of Prop 15 and Prop 16. I will stop there, but thank you again, Regina, for including me, and I'm very happy to be a part of this today.
Fred, you never disappoint and are always sensational. I'm so pleased to hear all this. Now, I know there's somebody out there's got a question for Fred. Now's your time. Get to typing. I mean, it's just incredible. You're almost halfway there.
Yeah. And you know, part of we were struggling, Regina, frankly, around the timing of all this stuff. We obviously wanted to take advantage of the moment and the momentum and all the announcements and commitments and declarations that everybody was making out there so that we could capitalize on that. But we also know that this is a marathon and not a sprint.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the reasons why we wanted to wait a little while, but also make this a 5-year thing, is we want to make sure that people understand that this, no matter how much money you throw at trying to address systemic racism and anti-Black racism, it ain't going to happen in 3 or 4 months.
Right.
And so while it has been difficult to work on these issues in this environment, we've been pleased by the response that we've gotten so far, and we hope that we can continue that momentum.
I'm always so impressed whenever I hear you speak about anything. We do have one question that's come in thus far, and it's, what type of networks is San Francisco Foundation seeking in Southern California? Yeah,
so we're really focusing on our backyard, and we are part of this. It's really, I think, about, let me have the list here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We're probably about a part of about 15 foundations in the state of California that are trying to advance this. So it includes organizations in Southern California, and they're really focused in on those Southern California networks. So the California Community Foundation, Liberty Hill Foundation, the Weingart Foundation down in Southern California. You know, most of the people on here are familiar with the California Endowment. They both have a presence up here and in the South, and they're focused in on that as well. We're more focused in on Northern California. And I guess that I would like to say this in terms of who's eligible for support. We're focusing in on entities that must be led and controlled by Black people. We're focusing in on organizations that have included in their mission the goal of combating anti-Black systemic racism and advancing Black communities as priorities. We're focusing in on grant requests that equip organizations to confront Black communities' long-term exposure to state-sanctioned violence and abuse. And And we're focused in on grants that can achieve the ultimate objective of increasing the power and influence of Black communities to affect structural change in policy. So generally speaking, those are the kinds of organizations that we think will be good fits for the fund.
I had a question as well.
Yeah.
Great presentation. I think you seem to make really effortless, like connecting these concepts that other people seem to like really struggle. Like you take rocket science and make it seem like K through 12. So much respect for that. I'm serious. Well done. My question was made me think, as part of what you said about Black Power and your role as a funder being a small piece of the overall puzzle. It made me think about something that CJ brought up. And so my question is, does the work of philanthropy and working from a public sort of infrastructure funding standpoint, with the resources that foundations like the San Francisco Foundation and et cetera have, does all of that help, or does that undermine community efforts like what CJ mentioned to sort of develop alternative economic practices to fill in the gaps? So I was just wondering how you see that as position.
Yeah, Brian, I mean, that you're making a really great point, and there are probably 2 or 3 ways that I would respond to that. You know, I grew up in a kind of civil rights, Black Power household. And so one of the frames that I hold is that even with good intentions, what funders have done over time is actually undermine the ability of groups on the ground to advance their agendas in a way that has fidelity, is probably the way that I would describe it. Like, just to take it, for example, right now, you know, you have folks who have worked for years and decades on issues like police abolition, defunding the police, those kinds of things. And then you have moderate philanthropy come in, want to support that work, and the first thing that they do is say you shouldn't be using the language of defund the police or police abolition. And immediately undermine the strength and the power of those who have been on the ground, who have been pushing these concepts. And actually, I don't even know if it's conscious enough, but diminish the quality of the analysis and the work that folks have been doing to get to this point. Like somehow or another, they got here by accident and didn't know what they were doing. And so that dynamic between philanthropy and community has got to change. And just because you have proximity to the money does not mean that you should be sitting at the head of the table. And so I guess the answer to your question is, it can be a very symbiotic relationship, but it requires people who sit in positions like mine to understand that our role, just because we have proximity to the money, doesn't mean that we get to dictate the agenda and tell everybody how to move forward. And that is the change in philanthropy and the power reckoning in philanthropy that has to occur in order for us to achieve the kind of transformative change that we're seeking.
Really dope.
Well, damn. Oh, I have to process. You just, it's heavy concepts. We did have one other question that came up. What types of organizations are contributing to support the $100 million funding goal, and what other funders are you seeking?
I'll start with the latter, and I may need you to repeat the first question. Okay. I mean, we're starting with the groups some of the groups that I mentioned, and kind of traditional philanthropic institutions who we think are well aligned with this. We are also going to the corporations that have made pledges around their intent to support Black-led organizing in Black communities and give them a vehicle to actually move on those pledges. And the other thing that we're doing is going to individual donors that we think could be aligned with this as well. Can you repeat the first part of the question?
Yes, what types of organizations are contributing to support the $100 million funding goal?
Okay, so those are the types of organizations that are contributing as well. So philanthropic institutions, corporations, and individual donors are where we're going.
Okay, so, and you're gonna shake down the athletes too, right?
Yes, we're putting opportunities in front of athletes as well.
Good. So some of them know, but they can't unknow after this bubble scenario.
Yeah,
you know?
and I'll just say, Regina, one of the things that's a challenge is that athletes are a part of a group of folks who also are individual philanthropists who come to philanthropy, and I'm not saying this as a critique, with a kind of charity mentality to philanthropy and not a mentality around transformative change. And so there's education that we have to do with the philanthropic community to orient them to their responsibility to supporting power as a mechanism to achieve change. Because that's not the way that folks really come to this work or oriented around it in the beginning.
I absolutely agree with that. And one of the things that I've been trying to push to some of our athletes who are funders is this concept of lifting up Black history, you know, supporting people who would do curriculum in the community to teach us about our power, the power that we used to have, the power that we can still access. And, you know, we may look and think we have no power. We still have power that we're not using. So I appreciate that very, very much. Keep those questions coming. We're getting ready to transition to our last guest speaker who has been, Brian, are you saying something to me? No? Okay. Who has been waiting very patiently. I am pleased to say that Dr. Noha is the Executive Director of the Roots Health Center. She is a big part of the Black Cultural Zone and has been on the front line with some of the most in-your-face approaches to the medical information, and is sharing that, I believe, on a weekly basis in the People's forum or presentation, the People's Briefing on Medicine. So she's a bad sister. So Dr. Noha, take it away.
Thank you so much, Ms. Jackson. And it's very hard to follow you three powerhouses. I'm just really, really honored to be here. And you all are really speaking my language, so this is exciting. So I'll just share with you a little bit about Roots. First, the mission of Roots Community Health Center, and I know it sounds a lot different than most health centers, is to uplift those impacted by systemic inequities and poverty. Right, so we recognize that we got to all the disparities that we got to, not by accident, but by the system, by the design of the system. It's multiple generations of redlining, racial profiling, disproportionate incarceration, institutionalization, the prison industrial complex, it's the predatory practices of big tobacco, it's the predatory marketing of big sugar. I could go on and on and on, right? So we accomplish our mission by providing medical and behavioral health care, health navigation, which is navigation services provided by folks from the community, workforce enterprises, housing, outreach, and advocacy. We know that advocacy has to be included. Just like Mr. Blackwell said, we cannot program and service our way out of disparities. Our systems have to change. The current systems have produced and maintained disparities for so long, and let me tell it, the disconnect between programs and services and what we learn there and the advocacy that we must engage in is actually part of what maintains the status quo. And so that is part of what we seek to rectify, not only through our services, but what we're learning from those. So Roots grew from a 2-person volunteer mobile operation. We hired our first staff person in 2013, and we've now grown to a staff of over 160. We started as a 1-room little clinic at 99th and East 14th in Deep East Oakland. And we put ourselves there on purpose based on the disparities, based on those map after map, the same map that looks like at redlining, that looks at premature death, that looks at disproportionate chronic disease, that looks at probation and parole and suspension, school suspension, and all of that. Is why we put ourselves there. And we've grown since to having multiple clinical sites, including our street medicine team that goes out to the encampments and provides medical care throughout Oakland, our barrier removal and navigation, jail-based reentry services, food distribution, our workforce enterprises and manufacturing apprenticeships, which we have at our 2 social enterprises, Clean 360 and Hamilton Broadway Signs. We hire from the community. We train and promote from within. We support our people to achieve their own economic empowerment. And our organic and I think community-centered approach has allowed Roots to earn the trust of our community, which includes our staff, that allowed us to really pivot quickly to add COVID-related services in a way that was really responsive to our community's realities. And those realities include a large and increasing unhoused population, large numbers of people coming out of incarceration, which of course increased during with COVID, essential frontline workers, and distrust of government and systems in general, which was part of the reason why Roots was created in the first place, is to be of the community and in the community and a trusted place that you could go to receive healthcare. And this mistrust of government and systems, has been a fact and a reason why we were founded in the first place, but it's really an issue now, sort of more than ever, with all of the misinformation and disinformation that's creating so much confusion. And unfortunately, I think adding to some of the disparities that we're seeing already. So our first step with COVID was protect the unsheltered. And so that meant going out to the encampments, enforce, providing COVID testing. Any positive meant a full-scale response that was coordinated with partners to manage outbreaks and keep it from spreading as we had feared initially with the unsheltered population. Next, we established free, very, very low barrier walk-up testing within the community. We started this in April, sort of before we had any funding, before all these, before I think the government systems kind of caught up and started to stand up testing centers. We had already done thousands of tests by that time. We've done over 18,000 COVID tests so far within our community. We have over 1,500 positive COVID community members. And, we talk to everybody, we contact trace, we learn, all of the, we're just learning a lot from the efforts of speaking to people who've contracted COVID or spread COVID among family, what is going on. And we take that and we turn that into the briefings that Ms. Jackson mentioned, which is public education, right? Our weekly people's health briefing. We're really focused on our East Oakland zip codes, the same zip codes that we started Roots for, right? The same East Oakland area with the same health disparities and underlying issues that, we sadly predicted we would be seeing disparities. And sure enough, East Oakland is being disproportionately impacted by the virus itself. We have the highest case rates in the county. We have the highest test positivity rates in the county. They're triple that of the county average. And as we know, decisions about reopening and schools reopening and businesses reopening and the tiers and all of that, that's based on the county average. So it's not accounting for our neighborhoods. And without that education, people don't have all of the information that they need to make informed choices. So again, contributing to disparities that we know, are sort of a recurring theme, right? We know that African Americans are dying at triple the rate of other racial groups. And this is not just in Alameda County, this is nationwide. And we really don't know all the reasons why. We can guess, I've heard all kinds of theories, but we deserve the rigor of science to find out what is going on. And so until then, We'll keep doing what we were founded to do, providing those services that are responsive to the needs we identify, taking what we learn, using the data, analyzing that data, not only to inform what we do next, but what we advocate for, who we network with, how we amplify one another's voices, and how we produce generational change. Thank you.
Did your slide ever go up?
No, that's okay. We could do without the slide.
Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I just, I know Camille had to leave to do childcare or something. My apologies to you on that. Dr. Noha, you know, you preaching to all of us who understand and are living it. So one question thus far, the vaccine. We've had some side conversations about that. Can you talk a little bit about that and what your thoughts are thus far?
Well, it's too early to have a thought about, you know, is this something that we're going to, you know, what's the plan, right? I think what we're thinking about now is a couple things. The first thing we're thinking about is the flu vaccine and making sure that particularly our vulnerable populations get the flu vaccine. Now, I'm going to admit I never get the flu vaccine. I know I'm not supposed to say that. I'm a doctor. We're all supposed to get it. I don't. This year's going to be a little different, and there's a few reasons. One, if you get the flu and COVID at the same time, it could be potentially very overwhelming and deadly. And so I'll take the discomfort and irritation and even that little under the weather thing that everyone complains about for that reason. Also, if you get the symptoms, you really can't tell the difference between COVID and the flu. And I just don't want that in my mind. I just want to know, you know, we're already dealing with so much, right? And it's safe and it has a long track record. And I think that is something that we can do to protect ourselves. We're hoping for a light flu season because everyone's masking and distancing. And so that's something we can hope for and keep our fingers crossed, but we really just don't know. The other thing I'll say that we're thinking about as it relates to the vaccine is that we've set up this massive infrastructure to do walk-up testing, and we are going to be leveraging that infrastructure because it was like we popped up a mass unit right there in our community, right? We created a public health response to a public health crisis in the community that needed it most right there at 99th and East 14th, and we've done the same thing in San Jose and are also targeting our more vulnerable communities there. And so we will use that infrastructure either to educate about the vaccine, to, you know, hopefully to administer. I hope and pray that we will have a vaccine that will have established safety and efficacy that we can talk about. But it is so early at this point that, you know, it's just too hard to say. There's so many things about this pandemic that remind me of AIDS, when AIDS first hit the scene. And I could draw so many comparisons and so many parallels, but what I will say is that, you know, initially this was something that was not thought to target our community, right? And now what do you see today? The disparities, the continued death rates is highest among African Americans and still rising, where in other groups it's all but controlled, right? And so one of the things that does worry me is that we will have lingering disparities within our community after it's sort of like controlled, or we're in a good tier now, when you still have vulnerable communities being disproportionately sort of impacted. And so I was reminded recently that when AIDS hit the scene, the then HHS director said, we're going to have a vaccine. In 2 months, we'll have a vaccine. Well, they had a vaccine and it was effective for a few weeks. So you would either have to get that vaccine every few weeks, right? So viruses are unpredictable and we don't know what we're going to get. And that historical context always helps me remember we can't just be holding out and waiting for the vaccine. We have to keep making these adjustments. We have to keep being nimble. We have to keep staying ready. And the next big thing is going to be, you know, continued economic fallout as we see the moratoriums on evictions start to fall away, and more people having to be in crowded settings. And so I think we're in this for the long haul.
Thank you, Dr. Noha. You have become the health wizard. There are several other questions that have popped up, so I'm going to let them flow. What are the numbers of COVID positives in the encampments looking like? And then I'll have a follow-up.
That was a very pleasant surprise and relief, is that, you know, it was much lower than we had feared. So in the beginning, that was the first population we were concerned about, already vulnerable, already premature death, already, you know, chronic underlying conditions. But as we know now, being outside is the place to be as it relates to COVID. And so the positivity rate that we have seen at our testing site has actually been around, at the walk-up testing site has been around 12%. But the positivity rate amongst our unsheltered folks that are living in encampments is still really low. It's actually lower than our average. And so it's about 4%. So we think that being outside is what is protective, but I also think that the networks of folks that really responded rapidly to give people access to hotel rooms, for example. So we've put a lot of folks who are homeless, and it's one of those things where, wow, I thought we couldn't do that. It's amazing what we can do when there's an emergency, where we had 7 Bay Area counties, something like that, work together, declare an emergency, coordinate, where I think a lot of us in the homeless space have been saying, can the counties coordinate? And we thought we couldn't do that. Well, it can be done. And so I'm hoping that this sets a precedent for the future around cross-county collaboration and being responsive. And so I think that helped tremendously as it relates to unsheltered people, is that there was a statewide response with all of the hotels, a regional response, in an effort to get people into hotel rooms. And then also, the coordinated response as it relates to outbreak management has been very useful. But so far it has been surprisingly low.
That's incredible. Thank you for that insight. And yeah, that whole hotel situation, people have been talking about that for years, and we just couldn't get it done for the homeless. That's crazy. So 2 more questions now. If you have had COVID, can you pass on the flu shot?
Oh, meaning can you decline to have the flu shot because you've already had COVID? Well, of course, you always have choice. That's one of the biggest things that we talk about at Roots. You have choice. We're just here to give you the best information that we can give you. If you've already had COVID, we don't even know if you are immune from COVID. So I think there's no reason that having COVID should change anything about your decision to get the flu shot or not. We are actually seeing some disturbing, although yet early and it's very small, but reports about people getting COVID a second time, and COVID being more fierce the second time because you've already have sort of mounted somewhat of an immune response, and the second time the immune response is that much stronger, and it is the immune response that is overwhelming to the system and that is causing actually a lot of the morbidity and mortality that we're seeing with COVID. So I hate to be that wet blanket. I feel like lately I'm the person with the worst news at the meeting, but that is, that is concerning. And so I would just say we can't let our guard down for any reason. I'm recommending everyone get the flu shot for the reasons that I mentioned earlier, but certainly if you're in a high risk category and at risk for getting pneumonia and being hospitalized and potentially dying from the flu, you should definitely get the flu shot. And so those would be, chronic underlying conditions, over 65, and then also our little ones as well.
Okay, so if you're getting the flu shot, I'm getting the flu shot.
I'm going to see if I can put it maybe on the briefing or on...
I got one more question. What is the connection between health and wellness and community power?
Oh, there are so many. Oh my goodness. Okay, I'm going to try to keep it brief. So first of all, if you're not well, it's very hard to build power. And this is one of the things that we learned and saw loud and clear from the Black Panthers, the food programs, the breakfast programs, all those things. It's like, although you think of social justice and you think of, really fighting and building power, there was a fundamental understanding that you can't be hungry and fight. If your basic needs are not met, you're not building any power. And so first and foremost, we have to make sure that, and I hate using even the term basic needs because it's so bare bones and, but we need those things, right? We need to be well, we need access to food, we need access to clean water, we need access to healthcare and all of those things in order to be able to build power. But I would also just say that, when you have a situation that there is no more, I think, like just in your face injustice than some of the health disparities that we see. If your life expectancy is 15 years shorter, where Roots is located at 99th and East 14th and 2-3 miles up the hill in the Oakland Hills, that is an injustice. When you see some of the things that have been going on right now with COVID outbreaks in some of our incarcerated settings and the disproportionate incarceration in particular of Black men, of mental health services being primarily provided in our county jails and in our prisons, and some of the, all of those things that are really human rights, violations. And so, So there's a correlation between our health, our right to live in a healthy way, and our life expectancy, how many years we can even expect to be on this planet, right? And so it's imperative, I think, that we be thinking about those things as we're fighting for social justice, because to me, that is one of the main things that we are fighting for. And so I think the last thing I'll just say is that when we don't have a grasp on what's happening, this is what I mean when I say the disconnect between the programs and services and the advocacy, we have to have a grasp of what we're dealing with. We have to understand that in Alameda County, African-American men make up about 6% of the population, something like that, and make up 50% of the 5150s, and 51% of the people who are in criminal justice mental health. That means they have a mental illness and are in an incarcerated setting, right? And so we have to understand, how this correlates to community services and supports, but then be able to advocate against those things. And so there's a tight, I think, correlation. I mentioned big tobacco, big sugar. These are industries that are predatory, that have made their billions, multi-billions on the backs of particularly low-income communities of color. And if we're not looking at, okay, why is this lung cancer rate so much higher over here? How does this correlate, right? We have to connect, I think, the disparities and the things that we know in the healthcare setting and with our healthcare data. We have to correlate that and connect that to the policy change that absolutely needs to happen for this to change.
Wow. So if there are any other questions, please send them in. But at this point, I think we're pretty close. We're at almost 1:57. I have been so moved. I'm never without words, and I'm kind of choked up here at just how precious the information that we have received is today. CJ, Fred, Dr. Noah, I revere all of you as experts in your field and global thought leaders. I'm hoping to, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little teary here. I'm hoping to be able to pull some of these nuggets so that we can put them in social media spaces in order to get some of this messaging out, particularly around the flu shot, but also about building power. And I know that EOYDC is going to be probably trying to figure out how to do some pivoting around making our advocacy deeper, because we're missing, deep dive into the power building. We've been kind of doing it for education and for work, but it needs to be so expansive. I appreciate all the folks that hopped on, our community leaders, our partners, our council members, our congresspeople, our individuals. And I want to hand off now to Brian Sims, the architect of the immersive learning experience. I cannot appreciate him enough. We met through the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Interdisciplinary Research Leader Experience, which is coming to a close, and it has benefited me more than anyone could know. So over to you, Brian. Thank you.
No, thank you, Regina. And again, just let me echo, thank you everyone for making space in your busy and hectic afternoons. Well, I'm on the East Coast. This is afternoon. This is like early morning for folks out on the Bay, but thank you nonetheless. CJ, Fred, Dr. Noah, thank you doesn't capture it, but we really, really appreciate it. I dropped a link in the Zoom chat to the Facilitated Community Dialogues Initiative website, which is Community SDM. As Regina said, the broad goal of this RWJF funded project is to do what we did here today, connect community folks with folks in positions of power and influence so that they can learn from community. We do a lot of learning from people with power and prestige and affluence, but we don't do a lot of hearing from folks like what we heard today. So I share some of that emotionality, Regina. Thank you again for everyone. And I hope everyone has a great day. We will certainly continue the dialogue. As she mentioned, these conversations are going on with communities across the country. So we would invite you to stay tuned in and tapped in. And one more thanks.
You all be safe.
Yep, everybody be safe. Thanks again.
Thank you so much. We'll get the recording out too.